Welcome to Amble, a town on the always riveting Northumberland coast. Known as the friendliest port in England, there's plenty to enjoy on a walk around this seaside town. And as we amble our way around the town centre on a tranquil summer's evening, we'll not only enjoy views of the mouth of the River Coquet as it flows out into the North Sea, but we'll also pass by some of Amble's storied pubs, admire grand local landmarks on the town square, learn the tale of Amble's medieval origins before it grew in size with the region's once thriving coal mining industry, and then, as the rain begins to move in, we'll venture across the grasses of Amble Braid towards the town's marina, which boasts atmospheric and quintessential waterside vistas. All of that is to come over the next 20 minutes or so, but we begin our walk next to Amble's historic harbour, positioned just beside the wide open waters of the River Coquet. Flowing for more than 50 miles across Northumberland from the Scottish border, the Coquet reaches its end here at Amble, where it enters the North Sea. On this tranquil evening, as the light begins to dim in the sky, the river mouth is mesmerisingly still, providing a picture postcard view that begins our walk in style. Now, we'll be returning to the banks of the Coquet at the end of our tour, but the river's mouth here, sheltered from the rough waves of the North Sea, has been an invaluable haven for boats for centuries, and it was in this area that a harbour developed, where local fishermen moored their cobbles. Cobbles, a traditional type of fishing boat specific to England's northeast coast, would have historically been a busy feature of Amble's harbour. But the truth is that, for much of history, there was no harbour here. In fact, the River Coquet used to flow out into the sea a fair distance further north up the coast, and it was only a major rainstorm in the year 1764 that caused it to change course to this area, around which the modern town of Amble developed. But as we take in a view of the river in its present guise, flowing out into the North Sea, it's worth us taking a look at a map to see exactly where in the country you'd find Amble. As we can see, this town lies close to the historic castles at Alnwick and Warkworth, roughly halfway up the Northumberland coast, around 25 miles north of the major city of Newcastle upon Tyne, and just over 30 miles south of the Scottish border. Indeed, Amble's position along the Northumberland coast makes it a rather unique place. Just here, we're passing by what's known as the Old Boathouse, now charmingly converted into a harbourside restaurant that caters to tourists. Because in the 21st century, Amble is a town well loved by holiday makers exploring this part of England. Now, there are plenty of tourist destinations along the Northumberland coast already, but what makes Amble stand out is its blend of industrial character, close to the major coalfields of the county's south, and its proximity to the borderlands in the county's north, which may be sparser in population, but are rich in history. We'll discuss how those two distinct regions of Northumberland meet here in Amble as we explore the town's streets. But let's stray away from the waters of the harbour for a moment, and onto Leazes Street, where we'll find a pair of local pubs. Just in front of us here is the fittingly named Harbour Inn, opened more than 150 years ago in the late 19th century, and which has hosted everybody from modern-day tourists to local fishermen and coal miners through the decades. Originally built in the Victorian era, the pub stands in the middle of a large housing development that was constructed for coal miners of the age, who moved into this town in large numbers as the region's mining industry reached its peak. With hundreds of new families in town, Amble needed a fair few places for miners to wind down after a hard day's work. And just here we find another pub, the old Schooner Inn, which was built a little later in the 1920s and operated for around 100 years. As we can see today though, the old pub has now been closed for some time, having poured its last pint back in 2022. Indeed, the closure of the old pub is symbolic of the ever-changing profile of this town. Because while coal mining and the export of coal from the harbour was a leading source of growth over 100 years ago, Amble today is developing itself as a hub for tourism, for those seeking to explore all that this wonderful region of England has to offer. As we can see, cruises depart from the harbour here out to sea, where holidaymakers can get the chance to see puffins flying in the air, and if you're lucky, dolphins and even whales swimming in the water. Back on dry land here, there are plenty more reasons to visit the friendliest port in England. Amble offers easy access to gorgeous coastal walks, beautiful countryside inland, and enchanting history right on its doorstep. Just over a mile upstream, along the River Coquet for instance, is the historic village of Warkworth, home to one of Northumberland's most majestic castles, which was built all the way back in the 12th century. The town of Amble itself, meanwhile, as an industrial centre for much of recent history, may not have the same medieval atmosphere as its neighbour just up the river, but the area around the harbour here has been pleasantly developed in recent years into a hub for leisure and relaxation. During the day, small waterfront shops and cafes open to cater to visitors ambling around this part of town. A sundial sculpture that we can see at the top of this small hill also offers a nice vantage point across the harbour village, which operates daily until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We're of course here later in the day, when the streets of Amble are quiet and very peaceful, as people make their way to local restaurants and pubs for a nice evening out. But as we've been ambling around the harbour ourselves, we've so far managed to ignore one important question. Where on earth did Amble's name come from? Well, it's sadly nothing to do with the kind of strolls you can enjoy beside the River Coquet in the town today. In fact, there are two main theories. One suggesting that the name was once Annbell, literally meaning Anna's promontory, a piece of land sticking out into the sea where a lady called Anna may have lived. Another theory, meanwhile, suggests that Amble actually derives from an old Gaelic word, umbale, simply meaning river mouth. Indeed, the mouth of the Coquet has long been an important site. This small wagon, for example, commemorates when a small railway used to run all the way to the staithes at the harbour here, carrying coal that was then loaded onto boats for export. Coal was exported from Amble here to ports all over Britain and beyond, and as we mentioned, the industry served as the main driver of growth in the late 19th century. Now certainly, coal wasn't the only source of income for the town at the time. Amble was also a hub of shipbuilding and traditional fishing, and so together, the people who worked in these various industries helped build the town into the form that we know today, the centre of which is found right here on the town square. Today, Amble's town square is dotted with a number of interesting landmarks. This huge sundial, for one, was installed back in 2001. And in fact, this is one of the largest sundials in all of Europe. It's gnomon, the large metal structure that casts a shadow, measuring a mighty 7 metres in length. Behind it here, meanwhile, we find an enclosed area surrounded by flags, and which is now decorated with a few cute sculptures of some of the many seabirds that you can see when in this area. Seagulls are of course abundant, particularly around unguarded portions of Chips, but puffins, everybody's favourite, are best seen by taking a cruise from the harbour out to the tiny Coquet Island, an amazing destination that hosts tens of thousands of seabirds of all species, as well as a colony of grey seals. That's a quintessential Northumberland excursion, and as the flag of the county flies high over the town square, we can spin around and turn our attention to perhaps Amble's most recognisable landmark, the Memorial Clock Tower, which was constructed back in 1925. As the name suggests, the structure serves not only as a clock tower for the townspeople, but also a major war memorial. It was originally built to pay tribute to the local men who lost their lives fighting in the First World War, while a plaque was later added to commemorate those who fell during the Second World War. In all, 187 names are written on Amble's Memorial Clock Tower, but it's not the only memorial you'll find here. This section of the town square is known as the Memorial Gardens, and just down beside the clock tower you'll find a pair of anchors and a bollard from Amble's quayside, which were placed here in 2021, creating a monument to the local sailors, fishermen and other seafarers who have lost their lives out in the waters of the North Sea, which for much of the year are rather choppier than we've seen on this summer's day. As we've discussed, while the Northumberland coalfields inland were a major driver of growth in Amble during the industrial era, the sea was a vital outlet for all of that coal production. And indeed, that wasn't the only reason that people ventured out into the often harsh waves of the North Sea. Local fishing, in particular, having long been an important industry here. Now, as we know, the River Coquet once flowed out into the sea further north than it does today. And so without the natural haven created by the river mouth, for a long time Amble was more of an agricultural settlement, a sparse collection of rural dwellings situated on land that once belonged to Tynemouth Priory, near Newcastle. Fishing was still a feature of local life though, and as this place expanded into a busy harbour town, that industry grew too. And the truth is that while coal exports have disappeared from Amble, fishing remains ever present. Indeed, Amble ranks as one of Northumberland's most important fishing ports to this day. Similarly, shipbuilding, another of Amble's main industries for a long time, also survives on a small scale here, with a local shipyard that constructs and repairs yachts and other pleasure craft. At the end of our walk, we'll see a few of those yachts when we pass by Amble's Yacht Club, on the banks of the River Coquet. But now making our way away from the town square, we find ourselves wandering onto Queen Street, for all intents and purposes, the main street in the centre of Amble. Named for Queen Victoria in 1837, this street boasts the majority of the town's shops, and a handful of restaurants and pubs popular among both locals and visitors. Bearing an appearance similar to many other coal mining towns in Northumberland, this main street was in its early years an important centre of the local community. It was along Queen Street here that you would have found everything from the local council offices to the courthouse, police station, and the Mechanics Institute, an important resource that was opened to provide technical and other education to adults living in this town. But while this 19th century street is emblematic of Amble's industrial boom period, we have to wonder what this part of town was like in the centuries beforehand. With the Coquet flowing out to sea further north, one notable feature of Amble that we don't see today were wide open salt pans that extended from the river down to this area. The salt pans were an important natural resource for many years. In fact, the salt which was harvested by locals was long used to preserve fish caught out at sea. And even after the river changed course in the 18th century, salt production did continue here until as recently as the 1920s. Small-scale coal mining also existed in the pre-industrial era, but Amble never managed to grow as an important point of export at the time. And so this area remained largely rural, the most significant structure for a long time being a large medieval manor house that was built by the monks of Tynemouth Priory. Taking tolls from boats that passed in and out of the river's mouth, the manor house was a profitable outpost for the priory located some 25 miles south of here. But it no longer remains standing, as it was destroyed in the 16th century during King Henry VIII's sweeping dissolution of the monasteries campaign. The manor house would have stood close to the building that we now find here, St Cuthbert's Church, Amble's main Anglican place of worship, which was built back in the year 1870. Dedicated to Cuthbert, the famous 7th century Bishop of Lindisfarne, the Holy Island located roughly 20 miles further up the coast, this Victorian-era church is one of 3 active places of worship that you'll find in Amble today, alongside a Catholic church on High Street and a Methodist church on Percy Street. Prior to the church that we see here, there was no dedicated place of worship in Amble. In fact, for most of history, the people living here had to walk just over a mile to the historic Church of St Lawrence in the neighbouring village of Warkworth in order to worship. Now, the lack of a church of its own for so long shows us that Amble, despite being an active settlement, was far from large. The population growth that came with industry in the 19th century was stark, and today there are some 6,000 people who call this town home. Having far outgrown nearby Warkworth, that makes Amble a fairly large settlement in this part of Northumberland, one of England's most sparsely populated counties. As such, the urban area does extend further, with more pubs and distinctive residential streets to be found further up Queen Street. But we're now going to make our way off of Amble's main road, and head back towards the banks of the River Coquet, where we'll be ending our walk in around 5 minutes' time. Having passed by the local post office, we find ourselves walking along the narrow North Street, a short alley which leads out from between the houses to a wide open area of grassland, which is known locally as the Braid. Stretching out towards the river, the Braid has long been an important spot in Amble. For many years, it was the site of a major shipyard, the flat land close to the estuary providing the perfect location for shipbuilding and repairs. As we mentioned, large-scale shipbuilding no longer takes place in Amble, but the Braid here holds plenty more intrigue. For instance, the Braid is so named after its broad profile, this wide-open expanse of grassland functioning as a floodplain for the river and a sudden burst of nature for locals right beside the town's main street. Meanwhile, a small footbridge just here takes us over a small stream, which is known locally as the Gut. It's a short waterway, flowing out towards the mouth of the Coquet, but it begins as a stream by the name of Gilder's Burn, just a mile to the west of the town centre, the source located on a raised area of land known as Gloucester Hill. Now, in the context of Amble's history, Gloucester Hill is an important name, because while the flatlands here by the sea later provided an outlet for people to export goods and to fish in the ocean, for many centuries this was a major vulnerability of the area. Around 1,000 years ago, this stretch of the Northumberland coast was regularly hit by attacks carried out by Viking raiders, who came to pillage the most vulnerable coastal communities. Amble, right by the sea, was right in the firing line, but the small number of people who settled further inland, at Gloucester Hill, benefited from wide views of the Coquet Estuary, allowing them to see incoming raiding parties. Similarly, while this flat area of land has regularly flooded through time, as the river has burst its banks, Gloucester Hill was better protected from inundation. But despite all these natural protections, it was the presence of a bustling harbour at Amble, here right by the river mouth, that led to so much development, and the town that we know today. Now, while there may not be quite as much export activity happening from Amble's harbour today, you'll have noticed a large number of yachts there on the Braid, because today the town is well known for its delightful marina, a popular mooring point for pleasure craft along the Northumberland coast. Complete with its own dedicated boatyard, which offers maintenance for vessels that are stationed here in Amble, the town's marina is a very handy base for those exploring the coast by water, with 250 berths available and often filled to the brim during the busy summer months. Just here, as we make our way to the edge of the Braid, we can see the marina at full capacity, one of a number of seafaring facilities that you'll find in this quiet part of town. Alongside the marina, Amble is also home to its own yacht and boating club, stationed beside the River Coquet, in fact, just around the corner from where we are now. Many people who come to Amble by boat often use their own craft to head out to Coquet Island, just a mile off the coast, and to get up close with the majestic seaside scenery as they head up towards the Holy Island, Northumberland boasting what is undeniably one of the country's most spectacular coastlines, home to beautiful sea vistas and a number of riveting settlements just like Amble here. And even as the rain begins to fall on this summer's evening, it can't take away from the tranquility of a walk around this town. Whether it be the distinctive main streets of the urban area, the pleasant harbourside village, the heritage of the town square, or indeed the wide open world of the Braid, there's so much to love about a visit to Amble, although there's nothing which quite beats the views on offer here beside the Coquet Estuary. This river, having so long played a role in the growth of this town through the centuries, remains its central feature, and at low tide we can venture close to its mirror-like waters, beside which you'll find a number of boats moored on the sands, waiting for the water to rush in once again. This unmistakable Northumberland scene is a real delight, and having made our way from the harbour and through the town's streets back to the riverside, I hope you've enjoyed exploring Amble and its captivating history on this atmospheric evening. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you'll be planning your own trip to Amble, the friendliest port in England, sometime soon. But for now, I'll leave you with a brief moment of peace and quiet as we take in a final view of this majestic riverside scene.